the WLBB Community Voice program. Our show brought to you by our friends at Tanner Health System. It is 8:30 on Friday. I'm your host, Colin Worthington, and we're on Facebook Live this morning, as well as streaming live on our website, newstalk1330.com and Newstalk 1330 AM and FM 106.3. Our guest this morning, you can already see him on Facebook Live if you're having a peek in. I'll introduce you to him right now. Back in January, Governor Nathan Deal announced his appointment to the role of District Attorney of the Coweta Judicial Circuit. I believe, six counties?
Five counties. Yep.
And we'll talk about the size of the circuit, too, in a little bit. John Herbert Cranford, Jr. has since then confirmed his intentions to run in the special election, which is coming up this November. A handful of local attorneys that had previously told us on WLBB Radio that they did plan to run in that race prior to this gentleman's appointment have since told us that they will back off and not seek election. So that might show that they have little respect for this cat this morning. Anyway, that November election, the special election, will serve out the remainder of the former District Attorney Pete Skandalakis' term, which was supposed to run through the year 2020. Now, our guest this morning, a native of Coweta County. He was hired in 2012 by the Coweta County District Attorney's Office as an assistant DA. He's prosecuted several high-profile cases, earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia, a law degree from the Walter F. George School of Law at Mercer University, and he currently lives in Noonan. Mr. Herb Cranford, good morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I appreciate you making the trek up here this morning.
Yeah, excited to be here.
And so I'm guessing everything I said was semi-accurate?
Yeah.
To the best of your knowledge.
Yeah. I went to Georgia undergrad. I was a religion major there, actually, and went to law school in Macon, so stayed pretty local. Didn't ever pursue a job in Atlanta or a private attorney job anywhere. I knew I wanted to be in the DA's office, and I interned for Mr. Skandalakis. I call him Pete, but while in law school, and so that experience, clarified for me that, he's a guy that I wanted to work for, and his view on prosecution was the same as mine. I'm a third-generation prosecutor, so my father and his father were both prosecutors in Coweta County. They were both the elected solicitor in Coweta County. That's what Doug Vassy does here. So I had a view on the role of a prosecutor in the justice system, seeking justice, doing the right thing, even if it's unpopular or difficult, always being transparent and having an open book in terms of giving everything to the defense attorney, those kind of things. If we think somebody's rights were violated, and I'm not one to believe that law enforcement does that intentionally, but sometimes mistakes are made. We're going to be open about that. Decline to prosecute the case if that happened. All those kind of things. Just at the end of the day, doing what you believe to be the right thing to do on any case. That's what Mr. Skandalakis was about. That's what I'm going to be about, and so I think the transition's going to be seamless in that way, So I'm excited about taking this position from him and continuing forward.
Let me go back to one of the things you said early on in your introduction. You talked about you went to study religion.
Yeah.
And I guess my question might be two parts. I think about, how does religion, help you as a prosecutor? How does it affect your judgment and your perspective, in prosecuting cases? But I also imagine you'd have to lean on religion for some of the cases you see, and it would challenge, almost be frustrated and challenge religion for some of the, horrifying cases you may have to deal with.
Yeah. For example, I had a vehicular homicide recently, and those are always tragic cases. It's often, this was just a young person that made a very reckless decision on the road that cost a totally innocent person their life, and the young person that did it was, by all accounts, otherwise in every facet of his life, a totally good kid, had an ROTC scholarship to college, all of that stuff. Those are trying cases, emotionally. But I think a lot of these cases, to your point, a murder trial I did earlier this year in Carrollton right after the appointment, it helps if you can lean on, some higher authority. And I think having a moral grounding is necessary to do this job well. Getting back to doing what you believe to be the right thing to do, regardless of what other people are going to think about it. If you don't have moral clarity, you could end up in a position where you're more worried about who you're going to please instead of, is this the right thing to do? Is this decision, the closest I can come to getting justice in this case, and all the different ways justice can be achieved in a case. A lot of times that's seeking incarceration. A lot of times that's giving somebody a second chance. There's a lot of alternatives to incarceration that allow for justice. But, so I think it is. I don't wear my religion on my sleeve or anything. I don't talk openly about it and publicly about it. I don't tick that way really, but I will say that it, in my view, to do this job well, you need that baseline, that underpinning. In terms of pursuing that major at Georgia, I think I started out as a history major. I toyed with political science and I'm trying to remember what else, maybe some philosophy. I liked comparative literature. That's where you're reading a lot of the classics and things like that. And I took a couple religion courses and realized, as a subject matter, it encompasses all of those things that I was interested in, And so pretty early on in undergrad, I knew I wanted to go to law school, and you can go to law school with a lot of different degrees, so that kind of gave me the freedom to just pursue my interest in religious studies, and I'm when all my friends were business majors and things like that, it was a little weird, for me to be pursuing that major, but I'm glad I did it. I mean, it gave me a much more in-depth knowledge of a lot of things that I was interested in, and I think it necessarily, like I said, plays a role in the decisions I make on a daily basis, just in terms of having the clarity of, I'm going to do what I think is the right thing to do, and if there are consequences to it, I can live with that, whatever those consequences are,
Herb Cranford is the district attorney for the Coweta Judicial Circuit, 5-county district, and Carroll County is inside there. If you have questions or comments this morning, of course, you can call us, or you can post your questions or comments to our Facebook page, because we are live on the News Talk 1330 WLBB Facebook page this morning. Before we take our break, conversation that I believe I'd had with Pete, interviews with him, he had talked about the size of our district. 5 counties, and maybe 2 of the counties are a lot bigger than the other ones. And I don't want to suggest that it's too big of a district for a DA to handle or for his office to handle, but do you think the people would be better served if that district was somehow broken up?
That's a hot topic these days. I've had just about every commission ask me, county commission, ask me about that one way or the other. What I've told them and what I've told various other people that have asked me about it, I'm looking into that. I'm in the process of running the numbers, seeing that, if it were broken up, would we get more personnel? I think necessarily we would get more state paid personnel, which would be a relief financially to the counties. I think necessarily it's the case that a smaller area is easier to manage than a bigger area, and not to say that the circuit as is unmanageable at this point. But it's something I'm looking into. I'm sure there are reasons some would put forth to say it's not a good idea to break it up, and that's I want to get all that information before I come to a conclusion about whether that's a good or bad thing to do.
If you thought it was a bad thing, I mean, that would just be the end of it, I suppose. But if you did think it was a good thing, what would be the process after that?
At the end of the day, it requires legislation signed by the governor, and that's something that would require the involvement of all the legislators in the circuit.
You'd encourage like Matty Brass or Mike Dugan, or somebody to put something together.
I have a lot of respect for those guys, and so I would give a lot of deference to what they thought the implications were, what the cost to the state would be. So I guess to answer it one way, I don't anticipate trying to, push either one of those guys around, in a political sense. But I would certainly have discussions with those two senators or any other legislators about their thoughts on it. That's part of the information.
Investigating it.
Gathering process.
Herb Cranford, our guest on this morning's Community Voice program. He is the district attorney for the Coweta Judicial Circuit. It's about 18 minutes before 9 o'clock on this Friday. We'll take our first break and come back and talk about his idea of the process of negotiating a case, how you decide to take it to court, and what all that involves. And we'll do that after this first break. Community Voice brought to you by Tanner Health System here on News Talk 1330, FM 106.3. And this morning we are on Facebook Live. More after this.
At Tanner, we're advancing health throughout West Georgia and East Alabama. Because we know that exceptional care isn't based on how many patients we serve, but how well we serve them. That's why we're focused on quality, delivering the best possible care for our patients. It's why we're expanding our clinical services and building new facilities to serve our growing community. And it's why we're looking beyond our hospitals and medical practices to develop sustainable wellness and preventive health programs in our region. What makes a hospital great has changed. It's not how many beds we have. It's how well we care for the neighbors who need them. Delivering the right care to every patient, every time, is how Tanner is advancing health with medicine beyond measure. Learn more at tanner.org or find a physician on our medical staff by calling 770-214-CARE.
Welcome back to the WLBB Community Voice program. Our show brought to you by Tanner Health System. I am your host this morning, Colin Worthington. Our guest is the District Attorney of the Coweta Judicial Circuit, Herb Cranford. And remember, if you have questions or comments, please post those to the Facebook page this morning, News Talk 1330 WLBB Facebook page. Before we went to the break, we did kind of tease a question that pretty significant. Maybe I don't know if it's different from the way anybody else might process putting together a case against somebody. How would they approach it, and how you would negotiate prosecuting it. I guess, what is the process? I mean, once the police do an investigation, how does that get to you, and then how do you decide how you would approach something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm asked that often. And I'll first back up a little bit and say the district attorney's office, again, we have 5 counties: Coweta, Carroll, Troup, Meriwether, and Heard counties. In Coweta, Troup, and Carroll counties, the DA's office solely prosecutes felonies that occur in those counties, and that happens in the superior court of those counties. In Heard and Meriwether, we also prosecute all misdemeanors that occur. Carroll, Coweta, and Troup have solicitors. That's what my father and grandfather did. They prosecute misdemeanors that occur in the county. Why is that? Once a county reaches a certain size, I think it makes sense to divvy those things up and to have an elected solicitor who's responsible for all of those misdemeanors, so the DA can focus on the felonies.
Well, yeah, I would think that all counties would do that. It seems like it'd be beneficial for all counties to have the solicitor do that.
I think, but it is costly, so that's why I think the smaller counties don't do it oftentimes. So and the definition of a felony is any crime for which the minimum punishment is a year. The definition, or a definition, of a misdemeanor is any crime for which the maximum punishment is a year. In terms of incarceration, misdemeanors can only be punished with incarceration in a county jail. Felonies, incarceration can be and often is in the state of Georgia penal system, the Department of Corrections for the state of Georgia. So that's just a little backdrop to explain this. So to the question you asked, a person is suspected of committing a crime in Carroll County. That's investigated by one of the law enforcement agencies that operates in this county. And by the way, I speak a lot to Terry Langley, and he's been very helpful in increasing the degree to which our offices work together to try to resolve cases more efficiently, so people aren't in jail as long. Prior to adjudicating a case, whether they're guilty or innocent, people a lot of times have to wait in jail. And even if I'm trying to send somebody to prison because I think they did a really bad thing, I don't want them to wait longer than they need to in the county jail for justice to be done in that case. And the sheriff's been great working with me on that, just as an aside. But so if the sheriff, for example, if the sheriff's department gives us a case, it's assigned to an assistant DA. Those are the people that really turn the wheels in our office. We have a lot of great legal assistants, investigators, assistant district attorneys, and they're really doing the work of the office on a day-to-day basis. That's what I did the last 6 years in assistant DA, the last 5 of which was in Coweta County. I actually started in Carroll. But those are the ones that are really doing the work of pursuing justice on a day-to-day basis. One of those ADAs gets a case file. It includes reports from law enforcement, witness statements. These days, thankfully, we have body-worn cameras that many officers wear. Sometimes there's still dash cameras, that come from the vehicles. Any physical evidence, that was gathered at the scene, pictures, just any evidence you can think of that was gathered in that investigation is with that file. Physical evidence, we'd have to go to the sheriff's department to view it. But so we review all of that, and we review the relevant statutes, the criminal statutes of if you do X, Y, and Z, it violates this statute, and we're trying to determine, to indict someone, to present a case to a grand jury, for example, we have to have probable cause. In layman's terms, did this person probably violate this law, right? But the way Mr. Skandalakis ran this office, and I totally agree with this, is to appropriately use our resources and to respect, individual liberties. We're only going to go forward on a case if we feel we can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in front of a jury. So just because we might think we have probable cause and could get it indicted, we're not going to present that to a grand jury. We're only going to present those cases that we think we can go that next step of proving it beyond a reasonable doubt. And again, I think that's, one, an appropriate use of the limited resources we have, and two, I think that's the best way to respect the accused, individual rights. Why continue a person through this criminal justice process if at the end of the day, if they assert their right to have a jury trial, we don't think we can prove it?
And I don't know if this is like showing your hand here, but if you don't believe that you could get, without a doubt, conviction, would you ever offer that plea deal, and then before deciding you won't go to trial, would you ever give that a try?
I think this requires a little explanation. So there are cases that we think, we're not going to be able to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt, period, and we decline to prosecute those, right? Then there are difficult cases. Those are cases that we think, I think there's a chance I can prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. In other words, if I take this in front of a jury, I think there's a good chance we could prove it. But also knowing there's a good chance they could be found not guilty, which, that doesn't mean the jury's saying, we believe they're innocent. That means the jury's saying, we believe you didn't have the evidence to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And a lot of sex crime cases fall into that category. Difficult to prove cases where if a jury believes that child victim beyond a reasonable doubt, they can find the defendant guilty, right? But, those cases, a jury might not be satisfied that there's enough evidence to corroborate what the child said happened. I've spoken to many juries who said, this was very difficult. I believed that child, but there just wasn't enough other evidence to corroborate the child.
I guess what I'm looking at is it ethical? I mean, if you believe that you would not be able to get conviction because you just lacking that one piece of evidence, but you believe that somebody's guilty, and again, this may be showing a hand. I mean, would you offer a plea deal before deciding we can't go to trial, before announcing we can't go to trial? I mean, I don't know if it
we would never, if we think there's no chance of getting a to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, we would never charge it. If
and that'd be beforehand. All right. I was working.
We would never charge it. Right. So so getting into the negotiation process, the three things we basically consider are our ability to prove the case, the severity of the crime, and the character, or in other words, criminal history of the defendant. So we could have a very serious case, a severe crime, but if our ability to prove it is weak, in other words, we think, if we get this in front of a jury, there's a chance the jury could find them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but we think that's going to be a difficult hill to climb, we'll make an offer for them to plead guilty to a sentence that's less than what we think the crime ultimately deserves. And so like in a child sex crime case, we give a lot of consideration to putting that child through a trial, re-traumatizing the child, who's going to necessarily be cross-examined by an intelligent adult lawyer, and that's just an example of, some of the things we think about in negotiating a sentence. The guy who harmed that child, we want to send to prison for as long as we can. As much as we want that to happen, we've got to factor in, one, our ability to prove it, because if we go to trial and lose, he's going to walk free and have no conditions of probation, won't have to register as a sex offender. That child is going to be harmed that much more knowing this person's still on the street. So for the certainty of conviction, a lot of times we'll give a discount based on the factors I just mentioned. Another factor is, like I said, the character of the defendant. So if for the crime charge we think that 5 years is the appropriate sentence, for example, but this person's committed the crime 5 times and been convicted of it 5 times, we're probably going to seek more of a sentence, a tougher sentence because of that history. Whereas a person who's never been arrested before for whatever crime, that's a person that we might say, look, if you jump through these certain hoops, if you do community service, if you pay restitution, if you write a letter apologizing if there's a victim, for example, something like that, we'll give you a second chance and let you plea under first offender. Or maybe if you do all those things, maybe we'll just dismiss your case if you deserve it.
And I would love to even talk about more, the thought process of making that decision as far as a financial benefit. But unfortunately, half-hour program, which means we're going to have to bring you back at some other time. But we've got about 5 minutes left in the show.
I'm a lawyer. We talk a lot,
We'll take our final break right here and come back with more Community Voice.
At Tanner, we're advancing health throughout West Georgia and East Alabama, because we know that exceptional care isn't based on how many patients we serve, but how well we serve them. That's why we're focused on quality, delivering the best possible care for our patients. It's why we're expanding our clinical services and building new facilities to serve our growing community. And it's why we're looking beyond our hospitals and medical practices to develop sustainable wellness and preventive health programs in our region. What makes a hospital great has changed. It's not how many beds we have. It's how well we care for the neighbors who need them. Delivering the right care to every patient, every time, is how Tanner is advancing health with medicine beyond measure. Learn more at tanner.org or find a physician on our medical staff by calling 770-214-CARE.
And welcome back to the WLB Community Voice program. Our show brought to you by Tanner Health System here on News Talk 1330, FM 106.3, and News Talk 1330 WLBB Facebook page. Got about 4 minutes left with our guest this morning, District Attorney of the Coweta Judicial Circuit, Herb Cranford. Going to go to Facebook for a question here. Derek Newton, one of our frequent listeners. Also, Teresa Culver-Pearson says good morning. So good morning to you, Teresa. Derek asking, what type of community outreach does the DA's office perform?
You know, community outreach is something that I think is very important for the DA's office to do. One of the difficult things about prioritizing it is limited resources. You know, the personnel, our top priority is pursuing justice in cases. An important role we play, though, is engaging in the community so that they understand why we do what we do, how we do what we do. So one of the things that I'm involved in, that Mr. Scandalakis was also involved in, once a month at the Carrollton Police Department, they have something that they've called the Pastor's Luncheon. They do that. It's just 12 to 1 o'clock. We show up and have lunch, and it's just a good opportunity for various community leaders, people that are in charge of different government agencies, you know, Child Protective Services, all the different government agencies, to come together. If people have questions about things going on in the community, they can ask them. If somebody wants to present an idea or like, for example, I anticipate speaking to the group at some point this year to explain some of the things I've explained today, you know, my thinking on this job, how I'm going to go about this job. And it's just a good way for a lot of people in the community from different areas of the community to get to know each other, to develop the relationships that will be beneficial down the road. You know, I always, in Coweta County where I live, I enjoy doing like the high school civics days where we go and explain. I think it's normally freshmen. We explain our jobs, why we do what we do. So I think in terms of engagement, an important thing we do is educating the public on, you know, the role we play in this community and why we do what we do. I think long term, the two things that are going to have the biggest impact on crime are education and community engagement. At the end of the day, we're getting somebody after they've already committed the crime. And at that point, you know, there's a lot's already baked in the cake, you know, and we're going to pursue justice in that case. Ideally, we can have an impact on young people before they get to the point in their lives where, for whatever reason, they violated the law. So community outreach is something that's important to me. I'd like to do it more. It's frankly a resource issue at this point, you know.
Herb Cranford is the district attorney for the Coweta Judicial Circuit. It's a 5-county district, includes Carroll County, and he was our guest this morning. Do appreciate you coming out. Great to meet you, and look forward to having you on the program a couple more times, at least maybe a couple more times before the election in November, the special election. But thanks for everybody watching us on Facebook Live this morning, and News Talk 1330, FM 106.3. Thanks to Joel for his great camera work this morning, and Steve Graddick for pressing the buttons. Have a great weekend, everybody.